Walter never hurried. He walked the hospital corridors as if time had no meaning, but his eyes constantly scanned the exits. He always kept his hands visible and never turned his back to a door. The doctors thought it was an old man's habits. The truth was, Walter had been seeing the world through a warrior's eyes for 30 years. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden identity, sacrifice, and forgotten heroes, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us keep these stories alive. These stories matter. On the third floor of St. Mary's General Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona, the morning shift always began at the same time. As nurses rushed through their preparations and doctors reviewed the first patient files, Walter Henderson would quietly enter through the main entrance. 85 years old, medium height, with neatly combed gray hair. He always wore the same navy cardigan, white shirt underneath, and black walking shoes. It had been like this for 5 years. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., never late, never early. The young receptionist Sarah would smile at him. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson." He would politely nod back. "Good morning, Sarah." His voice was soft, almost a whisper. Walter's volunteer card never left his jacket pocket. The blue plastic card simply read, "Volunteer, Walter H." Even his last name wasn't fully written. Human Resources never questioned this detail. An elderly man wanting to feel useful after retirement. Normal. But there were things about Walter that weren't normal. Nurse Rodriguez was the first to notice. Walter would never sit with his back to the elevator. He always positioned himself where he could see the exit. As he walked down the corridors, his eyes were constantly moving, looking at the ceiling, corners, people's hands, and despite his slow, gentle walk, his footsteps never made a sound. He must be an old cop, Rodriguez would think. Or maybe military. Walter's routine was precise and unchanging. First, he would visit the children's ward. He would talk with the little patients, read them books, organize their toys. His hands were large and strong, but when he stroked a child's hair, he moved so delicately, as if he were touching crystal. Then he would move to the elderly ward. The same courtesy, the same patience. He would chat with patients who were alone, fill their water glasses, adjust their curtains. He never complained, never showed fatigue. When lunchtime came, Walter would sit at a corner table in the cafeteria. Always the same table, back to the wall, facing the entrance. He would eat his sandwich slowly, sip his tea, but his eyes never stopped. He seemed to be constantly scanning. Dr. Martinez was the first doctor to notice this behavior. One day, he tried to chat with Walter. "Mr. Henderson, what kind of work did you do before coming here?" Walter slowly set down his tea. For a moment, something very distant appeared in his eyes. "I served in government," he said. He didn't add anything else. "Military service." Something like that. Dr. Martinez didn't ask further. There was a finality in Walter's tone. The past wasn't talking. The first serious clue about Walter's true nature emerged on a Tuesday in May. A patient in the ICU suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. Alarm sounds echoed through the corridors. Doctors ran, nurses prepared the defibrillator. Everyone was in panic, but not Walter. This caught Nurse Johnson's attention. When the alarm sounded, everyone was startled, jumped, started running. Walter simply looked up toward where the sound was coming from. Then he slowly stood up and began walking in that direction. He didn't run, didn't rush, as if he had experienced such situations thousands of times. "Mr. Henderson," Johnson called out. "You can't go in there. There's an emergency." Walter stopped. For a moment, a very different expression appeared in his eyes. Cold, calculating, controlling. Then smiling, "Of course, I apologize. I was just wondering if there was anything I could help with." But Johnson had seen that expression. That wasn't the look of a concerned volunteer. That was the gaze of someone assessing the situation, doing threat analysis. Another incident was even more striking. In August, a patient's relative went berserk at the hospital's main entrance. The man was yelling at doctors about his father's treatment, making threats. The security guard was trying to intervene, but the man became increasingly aggressive. Walter was nearby at that moment. He was busy watering flowers. When the man tried to attack a doctor, Walter stopped watering. He slowly approached the man and touched his shoulder. "Sir," he said in a calm voice, "maybe you could get some air." The man turned to Walter. "Who are you, old man? Don't interfere with my business." Walter's posture changed. Very slight, barely noticeable. But in that moment, the 85-year-old elderly volunteer disappeared. Someone very different took his place. "My name is Walter," he said in the same soft voice. But now there was a hidden power in that voice. And my suggestion to you is this: breathe, calm down, and speak politely with the doctors. Because there's no reason for anyone to feel unsafe in these hospital corridors. The man fell silent the moment he looked at Walter's face. He had seen something there. He couldn't quite understand what it was, but he knew it was dangerous. I was just," he stammered and backed away. Walter smiled. "I understand you're a father. You're worried. That's normal. But now, go have a coffee in the cafeteria and let the doctors do their job. Then come back and politely ask about the situation. Okay?" The man nodded and walked away. Security guard Jake looked at Walter in amazement. "Mr. Henderson, how did you do that?" Walter returned to watering the flowers. "Experience, son. Just experience." The real clues about Walter's identity were accidentally discovered by Margaret, a librarian working in the hospital's old archives. Margaret had worked as an analyst at the FBI before retirement. Reading people was her job. The inconsistencies in Walter's behavior had caught Margaret's attention. Despite being an elderly man, his reflexes were very fast. He had never been sick, never taken leave in 5 years. There were no family members listed in his personal information. His address was just an apartment number. No details. His social security number appeared to be relatively recently dated. Margaret, unable to contain her curiosity, decided to investigate Walter. Using her old FBI connections, she ran some checks. The result was shocking. Walter Henderson had appeared in official records in 2018. He had never existed before that date. No birth certificate, education documents, work history. Nothing, as if he had materialized 5 years ago. But when Margaret dug deeper, she found something else. Between 1970 and 2010, there was an operator coded WH in classified military files. Delta Force, then CIA's paramilitary division. The file was sealed at a very high security level. Code name, Ghost Walker. The limited information Margaret obtained was active duty in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, over 200 covert operations, 0 operational losses, retired in 2010 for completely classified reasons, enrolled in new identity. Program Walter Henderson wasn't his real name. He was a ghost who had fought invisible wars for his country for years, then blended into society. Margaret didn't know what to do with this information. When she encountered Walter, she began to behave differently. She now knew what was hidden beneath those gentle, slow movements. One day she gathered courage and spoke to Walter. "Mr. Henderson, you've been working here for a long time. Don't you have any family?" Walter paused. He sensed something different in Margaret's eyes. "My family died long ago," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to spend my remaining time usefully. Was your previous job very difficult?" This time Walter looked directly into Margaret's eyes. There was a very deep fatigue in that gaze. "Sometimes people want to leave their past behind and start over," he said. "I'm one of those people." Margaret understood. She wouldn't ask any more questions. October 23rd, Tuesday night, 9:30 p.m. Walter's shift had long ended, but he had stayed late that night. He was reading a story to Emma, an 8-year-old undergoing cancer treatment in the children's ward. The little girl was his favorite patient. At the hospital's main entrance, security guard Tom was maintaining his routine. A normal night. Calm, peaceful. At 9:47 p.m., 3 black cars entered the hospital parking lot. A total of 12 people got out of the cars, all dressed in black, faces covered. They were carrying automatic weapons. This was a planned terrorist attack. Target? A witness being treated in the hospital's intensive care unit. The man was going to testify against a major organized crime syndicate. The organization wanted to silence him. The first shots rang out at the main entrance. Security guard Tom fell. Windows shattered. The alarm system began to sound. Panic began in the hospital corridors. Nurses were trying to move patients to safe places. Doctors were trying to implement emergency procedures. Walter was reading a story in Emma's room when he heard the gunshots. He slowly closed the book. "Uncle Walter, what are those sounds?" Emma asked. Walter smiled at her. "Nothing, sweetheart. You stay here, okay? I'm going to lock the door, and I'll be back very shortly." He locked Emma's room and stepped into the corridor. The gentle volunteer, Walter, was gone. In his place was the ghost operator. In the corridor, he approached Nurse Rodriguez, who was running in panic. "Maria, listen to me. Gather the children and lock them in the innermost room. Don't open the door to anyone. Do you understand?" Rodriguez immediately nodded when she heard the authority in Walter's voice. "Yes, but what are you going to do?" "My job," Walter said. "Go now." Walter began walking toward the elevator. His steps had changed. Gone was the slow walk of an elderly man. There was the movement of a silent, fast, deadly hunter. Instead of taking the elevator, Walter chose the stairwell. As he used the stairs to go downstairs, he was forming a battle plan in his mind. Would people, probably military-trained, automatic weapons, target, ICU on the 4th floor, civilian hostages present, police arrival minimum 8 to 10 minutes. Walter's advantages. He knew every corner of the building. The enemies were unaware of his presence, and he had 40 years of war experience. When he reached the 2nd floor, he saw 2 armed men at the end of the corridor. They were checking patient rooms. Walter waited in the shadows. When the first man passed by Walter, he moved, a technique he had learned in Saigon 40 years ago. Silent, fast, deadly. The man couldn't understand what happened before he hit the ground. When the second man noticed his partner's absence, it was too late. Walter had appeared behind him too. "Drop your weapons slowly," he whispered. Instead of surrendering, the man tried to turn and fire. It was a mistake. Walter neutralized him in 1.5 seconds. Now Walter had the automatic weapon from one of the 2 armed men. He hadn't held such a weapon for a long time, but his hands had never forgotten the familiarity. He listened to the conversations coming from the radio. Alpha Team, second floor clear. Target on fourth floor. Is Bravo Team ready? Bravo ready. 4 hostages on third floor. Doctors. Charlie Team, holding the entrance. Police will arrive in 6 minutes. Walter drew a map in his mind. 4 people on the third floor, 4 people on the fourth floor, 4 people at the main entrance. Himself alone. In the old days, he had faced worse numerical disadvantages. As Walter climbed to the third floor, sounds were coming from the other end of the corridor. 4 doctors had been taken hostage, being held in a room. Where's the target? Someone was shouting. Fourth floor, intensive care, came the trembling voice of a doctor. Walter moved toward the end of the corridor. He began turning off the lights. Darkness was his ally. He caught the first man from around the corner, silently neutralized him. When the second man was looking for his partner, Walter used his radio. Alpha 2, change position. Check the south corridor. The man didn't recognize Walter's voice, but since the orders came clearly, he obeyed. As he walked to the end of the corridor, he fell into Walter's trap. Now, there were only 2 men left with the hostages. Walter approached the room door. He could hear conversations from inside. Charlie Team, is the third floor cleared? Can't get a response from Alpha 2. Go check. When a man came out of the room, Walter was waiting for him. The last man was alone with the hostages inside. Walter approached the door and shouted, Inside! There are 20 SWAT police outside. Surrender! Nonsense. I'll shoot the hostages. Walter opened the door and entered. Hands up. Okay. I'm just an old volunteer. No harm to anyone. The gunman, deceived by Walter's elderly, harmless appearance, pointed his weapon at Walter. Get on the ground. Sure, Walter said. As he crouched down, he pulled out the hidden knife from his ankle. The man didn't calculate that Walter could be this fast. As the knife spun in the air, the man couldn't understand what happened. The hostages were rescued. Now it was time for the fourth floor. As he climbed to the fourth floor, Walter was monitoring conversations from the radio. Bravo leader, Alpha Team not responding. What's happening? Unknown. Charlie Team, continue holding the exits. Has the target been located? Room 412. Get ready. Walter had to hurry, intervene before the witness was killed. But there were 4 men on the fourth floor, and they were now on alert. He decided not to go up by elevator, but through the stairwell. But this time he would apply a different strategy. He used the radio. Bravo, team. This is Charlie Leader. Police have surrounded the area. Withdraw immediately after hitting the target. Alpha Team already withdrew. Roger, Charlie Leader. This bought Walter a few minutes. Bravo Team focused on withdrawal preparations. As Walter approached room 412, he saw 2 men waiting at the end of the corridor. The other 2 were inside the room. He planned to activate the sprinkler system. When the fire alarm sounded, he could create confusion. But then he thought of something else. Simpler. More effective. He accessed the hospital's PA system. He turned on the microphone. Armed individuals in the hospital. This is the FBI. The building is surrounded. You have 30 seconds to surrender. This was completely fake, but it was effective. The men in the corridor ran to the window in panic. At that moment, Walter sprang into action. The door to room 412 was ajar, sounds coming from inside. Shoot the target. We're leaving. When Walter reached the door, there were 2 men inside. One was pointing a gun at the witness in the bed. The other was checking outside from the window. "Stop!" Walter shouted. Both men turned to him. They were surprised to see an elderly man holding an automatic weapon. "Who are you?" one asked. "I'm the guardian of this hospital," Walter said calmly. "And you're not going to harm my patients." "You're crazy, old man." "We'll shoot you too." "You can try," Walter said. At that moment, footsteps came from outside the door. The other two men from the corridor were returning. Walter quickly calculated. 2 in the room, 2 in the corridor, 4 at the main entrance. But now he wasn't alone, because the footsteps coming from the corridor weren't just from 2 people. Real police had arrived. LAPD. "Drop your weapons!" The men in the room looked at each other in panic. They were trapped. "Surrender," Walter said. "No need to do this the hard way." But the men chose to fight. The first one fired at Walter. Walter hadn't been under such fire for years, but his reflexes had never disappeared. He took cover behind the bed, counterattacked. In the 2-minute firefight, Walter neutralized both attackers. No harm came to the patient. When police entered the room, they found an elderly man sitting on the floor, breathing heavily. "Sir, are you okay?" Walter stood up. He slowly extended the weapon in his hand toward the officers. "I'm fine, officer, just a little tired." The next morning, St. Mary's General Hospital was the focus of media attention. "Elderly volunteer prevents terror attack" became newspaper headlines. But Walter didn't talk to the media. That morning, he again came to the hospital at 7 a.m. Same navy cardigan, same silent steps. Sarah, the receptionist, looked at him differently now. "Mr. Henderson, last night, you—" "I'm just a volunteer, Sarah," Walter said kindly. Nothing more, but now everyone knew. Nurse Rodriguez, Dr. Martinez, security guard Jake. They all looked at Walter differently. Margaret, the librarian, when she encountered Walter that morning. "Ghost walker," she whispered. Walter stopped. For a long time they looked into each other's eyes. "That person is dead," Walter finally said. "I'm just Walter, the volunteer at the hospital. But last night I just did what was right." "Nothing more," Margaret nodded. She understood. That day Walter's routine didn't change. He visited the children's ward, chatted with the elderly, watered the flowers. But now everyone saw him differently. When 8-year-old Emma saw him, she ran and hugged him. "Uncle Walter, I heard you saved us." Walter smiled at her. "No, sweetheart, I didn't save anyone. I was just here, that's all." But Emma was old enough to understand. "You're a hero, aren't you?" Walter knelt down, looked into Emma's eyes. "You don't need superpowers to be a hero, sweetheart. You just need to do what's right. You can do it too. Everyone can." Epilogue. The Silent Guardian continues. 3 months later, life at St. Mary's General returned to normal. Media attention diminished. Journalists chased after new stories. But something had changed at the hospital. Walter's presence was now felt differently. Everyone knew he wasn't just a kind volunteer, but a silent protector. New volunteers would hear about Walter. "That old man is very special. Don't do anything to hurt him." Walter never told his own story, never talked about his past, never showed his medals, because he was now Walter Henderson, the silent guardian of St. Mary's General. Sometimes at night, during shift changes, security guards would see Walter walking the hospital corridors, even though his official shift had ended. "Mr. Henderson, isn't it time to go home?" they would ask. "Just one last check," he would say. To be sure. And they knew that under Walter's check, no one at St. Mary's General was unsafe. People never fully learned Walter's real story. But they didn't need to, because some heroes serve silently. They don't expect praise, don't want recognition. Walter Henderson, or whatever his real name was, worked at St. Mary's General for 5 more years. He continued coming every morning at 7:00 a.m. He talked with children, visited the elderly, watered the flowers, and no one asked who he used to be, because who he was now mattered more. Sometimes young doctors would ask him, "Mr. Henderson, how did you stay so calm that night?" Walter would smile, "Because panic never helps anyone, son. You stay calm, make the right decision, do what needs to be done. But you're a volunteer. This isn't your job. Doing what's right is everyone's job," Walter would say. "Your age, profession, past, doesn't matter. Only what you do in that moment matters." When Emma turned 13, she asked Walter, "Uncle Walter, are you really a hero?" Walter looked at her for a long time, then answered, "Horidatiuantitoin idri." "Sweetheart, I'm not someone who is a hero. I'm someone who tries to be a hero. Every day, every minute, and so are you. We all are." When Emma grew up, she went to medical school. On graduation day, she found Walter. "You taught me to be a doctor," she said. "No," Walter said. "I taught you to be human. You learned to be a doctor yourself." When Walter turned 90, he could no longer come to the hospital every day. He came 3 days a week. But on the days he came, the atmosphere still changed. New nurses would hear stories about him. "That old volunteer, Walter? Yes, he's a legend. He saved our hospital." But Walter never wanted to be a legend. He just wanted to be useful. On his last day of work, a small ceremony was held at the hospital. The administration wanted to give him a plaque. Walter politely declined. "Thank you, but it's not necessary. I just did my job. But Mr. Henderson, you're a hero." "I'm Walter," he said quietly. "Just Walter. That's enough for me." When he left the hospital that day, the little patients in the children's ward surrounded him. They all wanted to hug him. "Is Uncle Walter leaving?" They cried. "No," Walter said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll always be here in your heart, in your mind, in your memories. And when you grow up, you'll help other people the same way. That way, I'll always be here." No one knows Walter Henderson's last day. One morning, he passed away peacefully in his sleep at home. Hundreds of people attended his funeral. Hospital staff, former patients, children, families. Only this was written on his gravestone: Walter Henderson, volunteer, guardian. Human, he did what was right, but his spirit continued to live at St. Mary's General. When new volunteers came, they were told Walter's story, along with the main message: you don't need superpowers to be a hero. You just need to do what's right. And today, in the corridors of St. Mary's General, sometimes in the silence of the night, security guards still say they hear the slow steps of an elderly man. Walter is gone, but his legacy remains. Because real heroes don't die, they just become silent. And what they do continues to live within others. Now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Walter? Someone who seemed ordinary, but was actually extraordinary? Share their story in the comments. Say their names. Because here at the Human Stories, we honor those who serve silently, don't expect praise, but deserve respect. If this story touched you, subscribe, share. On this channel, we publish emotional military stories every week that honor humility, courage, and silent greatness. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, if you see an elderly person working quietly at a hospital, school, or anywhere, take a second look. The past might be walking beside you,